The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Perspectives, we typically deal with political issues, and we're normally in the studio. Today, we are out at the Nashua Airport, Boire Field, right here in Nashua, New Hampshire. And we were out here a couple of years ago, if you remember, and you may have seen some of the clips recently advertising the fact that the B-29 bomber was going to return. And in fact, the B-29 bomber, Fifi, is right behind me right now out here at the Nashua Airport. If you had a chance to come down and take a look, you know this is an impressive flying museum. B-29 is here, along with the C-45 cargo aircraft and the T-6 Texan. You may hear some aircraft noises in the background. This is an active airport, and the B-29, the C-45, and the T-6 all have these wonderful sounding radial engines. It's a sound that's unmistakable. Yeah, I think we got one flying overhead right now. These folks with the Commemorative Air Force are out here touring around the country. They've been in Nashua before, and they're selling airplane rides. It's a non-profit organization that keep these warbirds flying. Many folks today were not alive, myself included, during the World War II era, and we're in danger of losing this history. And what people say is if we don't remember history, we're doomed to repeat it. So one of the things that these good folks do is remind the younger generation, the next generation, what World War II was like. Why is that called the greatest generation, those folks? Why were they the greatest generation? How did that happen? Well, it happened because they stepped up and took responsibility for themselves and for their countrymen, and they stepped into airplanes like the B-29 bomber behind me, and they fought for freedoms. So we're going to talk to a few people today about this project, about what these airplanes can do. We hope you have a chance to come out, and maybe you saw us 2 years ago. Anyway, welcome to Perspectives. We're back, folks. Again, my name is David Schoneman. I'm your host on Perspectives here. We're out at the Nashua Airport today, and we've got the B-29 bomber behind us, Fifi. I'm speaking with Chris Lynch, the airport manager here. Chris, thank you very much for coming.
Hi, Dave. Well, thank you for coming.
I think it's a great day. We got a wonderful day out here at the airport. We got big crowds. You can see the size of the crowds behind us here.
Yeah, the turnout's phenomenal. People have been lining up at the gate all day long since it opened this morning at 9 o'clock, and I think people are really enjoying it. We have perfect weather for it. Couldn't be any better. The whole week has been perfect. There's no rain really in the forecast. The rides, they book rides on the B-29, the C-45, as well as the T-6 Texan. The rides on Wednesday were sold out for the weekend for the B-29. So much so that they added a flight on Saturday night at 7 p.m. There's still seats available.
That's great.
And usually they sell out all the rides, never on the first day.
Have you been aboard yet?
I have not been aboard Fifi. I actually got to fly the C-45 the other day.
How was that?
It was, I can't even explain it. It was great.
Tell us about those radial engines.
Well, I've never flown in a radial engine aircraft before, so it was a new experience for me. A lot of power, but really smooth. Those engines are almost brand new on that airplane, actually. They have like 70 hours on them. So it's like flying brand new engines.
How much horsepower is it?
I don't know. Somebody told me about 600 aside. The C-45 was so much fun. It was very smooth. I thought it was going to be, they call it the bucket of bolts. That's the nickname of that aircraft. It was so smooth. I had no idea I was in a plane from World War II. It was that smooth. We had a beautiful flight. Like I said, I went up to Colonel Jonathan Oliver, and as soon as we took off, he gave me the controls, and I flew the whole flight. It was just fantastic. Great experience.
Well, Chris, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dave.
Glad to have you
Thank
here.
you very much.
Now let's get back to your job here, running the Nashua Airport. You're doing a good job.
Thank you.
A lot of folks are waiting in line to get aboard the airplane, and occasionally we run into a veteran who may have some experience with these airplanes or who has family who has some experience in these airplanes. And I met Paul here just a few minutes ago. Paul, welcome. Thank you very much for being willing to speak to us.
You're welcome.
Now tell us a little bit about your experience. You were military, and you come up from a military family.
Yes, yeah. My dad and most of my uncles were in World War II or just after the war.
Mm-hmm.
and most of them were in the Navy. My dad was in the Army, his brother was in the Army Air Corps, and he flew in B-17.
So they didn't fly the B-29, but they were certainly involved in the war effort in Europe.
Well, yeah, yeah.
And they flew a bunch of missions?
Well, yeah, he was killed on his 14th mission. It was a deep penetration raid into southern Germany.
I see.
Friedrichshafen, I believe, was the target for that day.
And the whole plane went down?
Well, they suffered battle damage, so they weren't going to get back to their base in England, so they were going to Switzerland. And the plane blew up over Bern.
Oh.
And one guy, the bombardier of the original crew, he survived because he was sick that day, so he didn't make the mission.
I see.
So other than that, you know, everybody, all 10 people were killed. Yeah, a lot of planes from the 8th Air Force and the 5th Air Force, or 15th, I think, out of North Africa and that, when they would go on missions to Italy or into Germany or whatever, they got shut up. They would try to get into Switzerland if they weren't going to be able to make it home, because they were there. You stayed out of a POW camp.
Yeah.
And you ended up being interned.
Yeah.
Although they would make deals, I guess, every so often, and guys would get back.
Sure, sure. Yeah, there's a famous story. Of course, the Memphis Belle movie is about the B-17s.
Yeah.
And it talks about these crews that flew all these missions, and the odds were stacked against them.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Very, very dangerous times, because of course we couldn't have fighter escort at that time because we didn't have fighters that had the range.
That's right.
So the bomber had the range, and that's one of the reasons they flew such large formations, is that based on statistics and attrition, if you got 1,000 bombers in the raid, many are going to get through.
Oh, yeah.
But some won't.
Oh, yeah, and they were, I mean, you had the Schweinfurt and Regensburg mission. There was a double mission. They lost 60 bombers that day.
Yeah.
So that's 600 men.
Yes.
And I'm back at their base. You know, either they're dead or the prisoners of war or whatever.
I think that we were talking earlier about why the Commemorative Air Force does these tours. And one of the reasons is so that young folks today understand what World War II was like. Now, I was born in 1956, so I was born after the war.
Yep.
That's not my experience. My parents lived through with that. I was talking with my mom the other day, told her I was going to be out here, and you know, she was a little girl. She doesn't have recollection, clear recollection, because she wasn't an adult, but she at least lived it. But there's very few people around these days who lived in those eras, certainly as an adult with some strong recollection of what it's like.
Oh, yeah, yeah. They're losing 500 a day, I think, is the last figure I saw.
Yeah.
Of you know, people from World War II and that.
Right.
And
almost as bad as during wartime.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because if one mission you lost 600 men or 600 crew.
Oh, yeah.
That's powerful, and I think that what made that generation what we call the greatest generation is the fact that they were normal people, farmers, plumbers, carpenters, newspaper boys, whoever they were. They signed up and they went and they fought for their country. And as young people, they became heroes. They were doing extraordinary things. The crew average age on a B-17 was very young.
Oh yeah, they were all young kids, basically. I mean, you had people who were majors, colonels, and so forth in their late 20s.
That's amazing.
You know, well, yeah. But again, it's war, and that's the way it is.
Yes. Now, I was never in the military, but a few years ago, I had a chance. I'm in aviation myself, and was involved flying the UAVs, the drones, so-called drones. And I was stationed in Iraq, and I was stationed in Afghanistan, working alongside the Army. And like I said, I was never in the military, but I see some of these soldiers who are in their late teens, early 20s. They're kids. And the level of responsibility they have is phenomenal. The maturity they possess is incredible. And I think the military does that for folks. And certainly during the days of World War II, when young folks were flying these missions, defending the free world, essentially, it made them into heroes, and we have so much to be grateful for their service.
You're right. And well, I put in 27 years, but I was in the Army National Guard. So, you know, that's a nice, easy way to put in your service time. But again, as a member of the Guard, you can be called up, and my outfit did get called up and shipped over to Iraq in 04, 05.
So you were there in 04 and 05?
No, I had retired in 2000.
I see.
I was very lucky.
Yes.
Very, very lucky.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that I went, because you read about this stuff and you want to participate. You want to support your country. I'd never seen it. I'm glad I went. I don't want to go back.
Yeah,
I'm glad
I
to be home.
I don't blame you.
I'm glad to be home. But I'm very grateful to the folks like your relatives who served aboard the B-17 and all the other capacities during World War II. And I'm very grateful to the folks who are over there today, right now. Because they're in harm's way and they're defending our freedoms, and that's very, very important.
It's all voluntary now.
It's all voluntary.
I didn't have to go at all.
Right.
I was 29 years old when I volunteered, and I was back in 1973. We were the first of the volunteer army, as it was called. And I didn't have to go, but I always wondered, could I hack going through basic?
It's important to serve the nation. It's important to serve in whatever capacity we can.
Yes, well, it is, and because now it's 1% of the population that makes up our military.
I know.
So, a lot of people don't feel what happens, if somebody gets killed or injured or whatever.
Yeah, they don't feel it.
Because their son and daughter isn't there.
Right. Now, we don't want to have those experiences, but I think one of the reasons that we have these flying museums is so that young people especially can see what the folks back in the 1930s and 40s did, the lives they lived, and the sacrifices they made.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to forget.
That's why I come to all of these, and I've flown on the B-17 3 times.
How was that? That must have been an experience.
So great.
Yeah,
and again, that's because my uncle was there.
Yeah.
If he hadn't have been there, I probably wouldn't have been enthralled with it, but
Sure.
he was, and hey, I got a chance to actually fly in one.
Wow.
To really see a real one, not just in the movies.
Yeah, that's
So,
good.
hey, I enjoyed the hell out of it.
Good for you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your service. I appreciate it. Thank you to your relatives too. They made the
You're
ultimate
welcome.
sacrifice, and it's phenomenal. And we're just so grateful in this generation for those folks who preceded us.
Yes, we are.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Take care. Have a
All
good
right,
day.
You too.
Thank you.
We're back. We're still here at the Nashua Airport. We're out here in July. We have Fifi, who've been the B-29 bomber that we've been talking about today. We've interviewed a number of people. We also have with us on display here today a couple of vehicles from World War II era. We have a deuce and a half truck, a cargo truck behind me here, and I'm sitting here speaking with Jeannie. Jeannie, welcome. Thank you for being willing to talk to us.
Well, it's always a pleasure to join in with World War II veterans, and especially Fifi.
Yes, you've known this airplane and this crew for a long
Yes,
time.
we have. My husband flew in it. I took pictures.
Wow.
And my dad did training films in the B-29 and loved it, so I feel I'm honoring my dad by this hobby that we do.
So he was a filmmaker, or he was a pilot?
He wanted to be a pilot, but because he wore glasses, they would not accept him. So he joined the first motion picture unit, FUMPU.
I see. And he was making B-29 training films for the crews.
Right, to drop the atom bomb.
Wow. Well, it just goes to show there's many, many ways one can serve their country.
Absolutely.
We don't need to be the pilot in the seat, in the left seat or the right seat, or the bombardier or the gunner or anything. There's many, many things someone can do. And certainly back in the era of World War II, people did many different things, whether they were at home putting airplanes together, Rosie the Riveter, we heard those kinds of stories, or farming, or even people who were subject to rationing, just to make sure that there was enough supply for the military. And so your dad got involved in film, and he was doing training films. That's very interesting. So he was teaching the crews what they were likely to see?
Right. I have pictures back on the table of some of the very original pictures that we found after my father passed away that are kind of precious because they're original World War II.
Wow.
Of the potential bombing sites. They had a setup in the studio in Culver City. He was in for a while with Ronald Reagan and some other movie stars, which we can't identify at this point. And my mom was a Rosie the Riveter.
Really? Wow.
She inspected aircraft at Grumman Airfield on Long Island while my dad was waiting to be stationed.
Wow. I saw the brochure that you had. You showed it to me, and I saw a picture in there of a studio.
Yeah.
It looked like the planet, the Earth, and cameras were set up, and so everything was built in miniature.
Yep.
And then the cameras would be moved across as if the airplane was flying across and would show the potential targets, so that by the time the crew got there, they would recognize the land masses or the rivers or the coastline or whatever.
Yeah, and there's more detail on that in pictures that I have of potential target sites where they're like bullseyes along a certain area, all labeled what they were.
Wow.
Unfortunately, my dad passed away when he was 56, so we didn't get that hands-on. It's just what we are interpreting
I see.
from these pictures. I mean, of course, we talked about the war. We were brought up talking World War II, but in funny ways, and we were told not to talk Army talk, and now I know what Army talk is. I didn't know then.
Yeah.
Brought up with World War II,
Yes.
bunk beds. I never thought to ask my parents. I assumed they came from the Long Island barracks, but I don't know.
Oh, wow.
So Steve and I kind of started slowly with this hobby, and I kind of mentioned that I wanted a Jeep because it's something more girly that I would be able to handle.
So you own a Jeep.
So I own a 1942 Jeep that's here,
Wow.
and we try to honor veterans. Particularly right now, we're focusing on World War II because we have World War II equipment, information. Go to veterans' homes to keep history alive, to thank them.
Yes.
We have had some fun experiences with our vehicles, but it's a pretty serious hobby to honor.
Of course. It is a serious hobby to honor. And I was speaking with some gentlemen earlier about the need to keep this history alive because there's only a couple of B-29s that are flying in the world. This is one of them, only two.
Doc.
There's one right here in Dock. Yep, we heard about that. And while there may be more vehicles, there's not that many more. And here we have a deuce-and-a-half truck. What does deuce-and-a-half mean?
It's a 2.5 ton.
2.5 ton. There we go.
2.5 ton cargo truck.
2.5 ton cargo truck.
And it has right now the troop seats are up because the Jeep was in the back. The troop seats come down and would take, I'm not sure of the number, but I'd say probably 10, 12
Yeah. Soldiers in there.
soldiers in there.
Right. I think I've seen old uniforms, and you look at the size of the uniform, and I don't think those uniforms have shrunk.
No.
They were not
they were-
as big as people are today.
Absolutely.
And that's interesting too. I've had the chance to pick up some, hold some World War II equipment, packs and rifles and canteens and whatever. And I think about the men or the soldiers who stormed the beaches in Germany, and I think they carried all this stuff. And what did they weigh? I'm a little over 200 pounds, and I don't mind saying that even on the air, right? But some of these guys were probably 140 pounds.
Yep.
That's how big they were, and that's not big. And they were carrying the same things. And I just think
Absolutely.
about the work that they did, the shape they had to be in, and the difficulty of it. Now, maybe back then this was as light a weight as they could make it, but it was a lot heavier than things are today.
Absolutely.
So it's really something that when you think about what people have done.
And you look at some of the old films and what they had to wade through with their heavy leather boots.
Yes.
How long did they have to be in wet clothing?
Sure.
Just some of the things.
Yeah.
So one thing that we do is honor the anniversary of Pearl Harbor in Concord, New Hampshire on December 7th.
Great.
And it's usually cold and snowy, and I'll just say, well, I guess we can tough it out.
Sure.
What these guys went through, we can tough out a day.
Right. When you think about the war in Europe during the wintertime, those cold months, it was very, very harsh. And you see some of those pictures, it was grueling. And the canvas top on this truck doesn't provide a lot of insulation.
If it's hot out, it's stifling in there.
And if it's cold out, it's not
It's
much
cold,
warmer.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. But they cram the guys in there. Maybe they would keep warm just by sitting next to each other. But it's not a big truck. It's 2.5 ton, and your Jeep fits inside of this truck.
That's right.
A modern Jeep today, we were talking about
No.
earlier, if you see a Jeep on the road today, there's no way it would fit inside this truck. This truck might fit inside a Jeep, depending on
Right.
some of these Jeeps. So things have changed, but it's great to keep the history alive. Tell us a little bit about the uniform you're wearing.
I'm actually honoring my grandmother, my mother's mother, Hazel, who served in the Red Cross as a volunteer during the war on Long Island. And it's the production corps, which is this pin. There were different volunteer units in the Red Cross, and they did things like they had people knitting mittens, scarves, vests for the soldiers. Red Cross would put together packs with playing cards, cigarettes,
Sure.
just a few things to liven up the troops,
Yeah.
make them feel
Yeah.
at home. Let's see, and that they were put in like a herringbone tweed bag that the Red Cross would make, and then the Red Cross would have their own label in there, maybe from what chapter it was from.
Sure.
So I have different labels and different things.
Nice.
So Hazel wore this uniform with the Red Cross, this, and the veil, which is blowing all over the place.
Well, it's getting windy out here
It's
today.
very-
We have the C-45 coming in once again. We can hear those engines in the background, and I think some of the prop wash makes its way over here. So,
Well, she made, the only thing that we knew of was that she sewed bandages for the soldiers. And I know they were made out of cloth and not gauze, because she once sewed her finger right through her finger.
oh my,
So that's all I know. She passed away before I was 2, so
I see.
I don't remember her.
I see.
I just know her
From the stories.
from my mom.
Yep. Well, it's important to keep these memories alive and to let, like I say,
Yep.
the young people know. And I think it's great that you come out here. You're not part of the Commemorative Air Force.
No.
But you're familiar with them, and they're familiar with you.
That's
and,
right.
You are based in New Hampshire.
Yes.
Okay, so they fly in from Texas, and then you join them here. And I know you've been out here at the airfield before. We'd be glad to have you out here
Yes.
in the future. I understand that the Commemorative Air Force may be bringing another airplane back this fall.
Oh.
I heard that today from the airport manager. I was speaking with Chris Lynch earlier. So if that's the case, we'll look forward to seeing you out here then too.
Okay.
It's a great truck. It's a great Jeep. It's really, really something to see.
I don't think we said the year. It's a 1943,
1943.
and my Jeep is a 1942.
Wow, that's wonderful. Good. Well, thank you very much, Jeannie. Very
You're
glad to
welcome.
talk with you. I appreciate that, and we'll look forward to seeing you out here again.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, we're back here at the Nashua Airport, standing in front of Fifi, the B-29 bomber, one of the 2 flying B-29 bombers in the world. And as a matter of fact, speaking about flying, this bird's about to go up. There's a training flight this afternoon that's going to be departing in a few minutes. But before we depart, I wanted to take a little time to talk with Niels Agathar. And thank you, Niels, for coming on here.
Oh, glad to be here.
Tell
Thank
us
you.
a story about the airplane. You have a family history with this airplane.
No, I do. My father was a B-29 man during World War II, assigned to the B-29 program. So he actually did very little combat, because he was with the airplane, with the program from 1940 to 1945. So through the development phase, the testing phases, and so on, and then he deployed with with the airplanes and their crews. And then after the war, like every other veteran, went off to make his life, go to work and so on. And in 1959, 1960 or so, he joined the Commemorative Air Force, and they were putting together their collection. And at that point, they had less than a dozen aircraft. Today, we're 170 aircraft all told. And his feeling was, you couldn't have a complete collection if you didn't have a B-29. And since that was his airplane, he thought, let's go out and find one. And interestingly enough, there were just none to be had. So there are 30. This is why the Commemorative Air Force exists. So there were 3,600 or so of these built. And by early 1960s, if you wanted to see one, you had to go to a few Air Force bases. We're talking about less than a handful of them. Or you obviously go see the Enola Gay or Boxcar. And not very many after that. And the rest of them had essentially been smelted down. There were a few at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, which is on the ocean essentially, and they were in pretty bad shape because of the corrosion and the way they'd been treated. And my father turned those down. That would be a very hard restoration. And then by sheer luck, they found some in the desert in California at the China Lake
I'm familiar with that.
Naval Weapons Depot Center. And it wasn't on kind of typical military. There wasn't on any inventory. They claimed that those planes didn't exist, even though you could physically lay your eyes on them. But anyway, long story short, they were, in fact, all but one were Air Force airplanes. And my dad had stayed in the reserves and was fairly well connected. And so he arranged for one to be donated to the Commemorative Air Force, Fifi. So they he and a group of people went in, they selected the one they wanted. Some were in better shape than others. This one seemed to be in the best condition. Picked it out. It had sat on the ground for 17 years.
Wow.
And about 6 weeks later, it flew out. It flew to Texas. And then the bigger challenge came along was to how do you get so you can fly it on a regular basis. So because the Air Force had been very generous in their gift, but it was conditional in that it was a one-time flight. Not unlike you might have a gun at a VFW post. Well, it's been demilled, so that you can't shoot it, right?
Sure.
So this was the same concept. So my dad went to work with trying to lobby people, trying to figure out how to get this thing lifted, and he kept running into roadblock after roadblock, and he finally went to Barry Goldwater. So Barry Goldwater was the head of the Armed Services Committee, very powerful man, a World War II vet. My dad didn't know him. My dad just went, not even as a constituent, because we're not from Arizona, but just as a citizen. Sat at his office for a long time, and finally a secretary took a little pity on him and got him in to see the man. And Barry Goldwater was a little bit like a Tea Party guy. He's not he was about small government, not big government. And here was my father telling him this, the story of what the Commemorative Air Force was trying to do, and really to preserve Barry Goldwater's history, World War II history, veterans history. Right. And so Barry Goldwater made literally one phone call, and it was a done deal.
Great.
So they lifted what was called a no-fly clause. So now the issue was, how do we maintain it? I mean, it burns 400 gallons of fuel. That hasn't changed since World War II. And it's a big endeavor. And so my dad said, why don't we take it on the road? And got a group of people. And so this was the first warbird to hit the road. And so we said, in those days we couldn't sell rides, so it was hats, t-shirts, cockpit tours to maintain the aircraft. So anyway, shortly, to get to the name issue, shortly after the no-fly clause was removed and we're finally beginning to fly the airplane on a regular basis, the crews, not my father, the crews named the airplane Fifi, which was named after my mother, after Vic Agatha's wife, my mother.
Wonderful.
And then put the A on the tail for Agatha, in his honor.
Wow, that's great. Quite a story.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
So it's family investment, and the idea is to preserve this history so that folks today have a sense of what military men and women back in the day did and how they served the country.
Exactly. I mean, you can go to, nothing against the Smithsonian or other place, you can go and see them, but to see them live is different.
It's different.
And to see them, especially if you come out here on a day when we're doing maintenance, to get a sense for how hard the young men worked in World War II to keep these things going in order to make the mission ready.
I was talking to one of the gentlemen, one of the volunteers you have here today, his name is Chase, who was telling us about the work that goes into 1 hour of flight. How many man hours does it take? And it's amazing. Military airplanes, you think you just get in and fire them up and go.
Well, it is.
But it's not the case.
It spends 6 months a year on the ground in Fort Worth, Texas, in a hangar, torn apart to do repair and maintenance, put it all back together, and then hit the road. And then even on the road, we're doing maintenance on it all the time. So it's a labor of love.
I was here yesterday. My son and my wife and a neighbor friend came. We were watching the C-45 fly. And every time the C-45 landed, the pilot got out, put a ladder in front of the wing, got up and looked in the engine and did something to get it ready for the next ride.
That's right.
So we can't just, kick the tires and light the fires.
That's a really low maintenance, reliable airplane relative to this,
Sure. You got 4 engines here, and it's a lot of gas, a lot of oil. You see oil pan dripping on the ground. It's just the nature of a radial engine.
That's right.
But the tires, someone said the tires are so expensive, and I don't know what kind of life you get out of those, but there's tires, and there's brakes, and there's cables.
So tires are $5,000 a piece for a recap.
Wow.
So you're looking at $20,000 just in tires on this airplane. Plus we have to have spares.
Right. So you're going up for a training flight now, and I guess the idea is to make sure the plane lands straight and we can keep those retreads going for as long as possible.
That's it, exactly. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's great to have you here in Nashville. Come back anytime. We really like having you guys here.
We're glad to do it.
Good. Well,
we hit the road about 25, 26 weeks a year, and this is a great stop for us. Thank you
so much.
Good.
We're glad to hear it, and enjoy the flight.
Thank you so much.
We're going to watch you
take
off.
Support. Thank you.
Well, folks, we're at the end of the day here. Fifi's about to depart for a training mission, and I hope you've enjoyed the program today, brought to you by Access Nashua. My name, once again, is David Schoneman, and you're watching Perspectives, and I hope you've enjoyed the show. If you get a chance in the future, come out here to Nashua Airport and see some of the great warbirds that these groups present. They're preserving history for future generations, and you don't want to miss it. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.